How can you improve your fluency in English? What's the negative of had better? And what's the best place in Belfast to have a coffee? We answer all these questions and more questions that we've received from you in this episode of
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to this podcast, you are very, very welcome. And if you've come back again, thank you for listening. My name's Craig.
And my name is Reza.
And with 50 years of teaching English between us, we're going to help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you, mate? What's new?
I'm doing well, thanks. I'm fine. We haven't seen each other in a while, I believe.
No, it's been a while since we've podcasted together. As regular listeners know, we tend to batch record these episodes, which means we record 3 in one morning and then have a lovely lunch together. So if you are not getting immediate feedback, please be patient. We will give you feedback on your messages as soon as we can. Before we begin, I want to say hi and hello to a lovely group of students who are studying with me in the conversation course. So a warm hello to Lola, Concha, Lumir, Patricia, Fabiana, Lourdes, Aida and Sonsoles. I know you're listening, and if you're interested in studying with me and a lovely group of students in the future, why don't you put your email at englishmasterclass.net and I will be in touch by email with details of the next conversation course. What's first this week, Reza?
As Craig said, we got loads of feedback. Let's start off with a voice message, and that's from Jose from Sevilla, or Seville in English. Sevilla or Seville in Spain.
Hello, Kai. Hello, Reza. How are you doing? This is Jose from Sevilla, Spain. I've been listening to your podcast for the last 3 years at least. I'm delighted with your amazing work. You have helped me a lot with my B1 and B2 certification exams. So I'm really, really thankful. I would like to ask you if there is a specific expression, because in Spanish, when I'm discussing with my child, sometimes I just say, esto es porque sí, or esto es porque no. So, do you know if there is any expression that means porque sí or porque no? Thank you. Thank you for your amazing work, as said before, and bye-bye.
Good question, Jose. Good question indeed about the porque sí, porque no. Well, we've got a few possibilities for you. One thing you could say is because I said so. And that can be negative or positive. In English, it doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. It's like, you can't go out. Why? Because I said so. Or you must go out. Why? Because I said so. Positive or negative, it's the same. Can you think of any others, Craig?
Maybe you could say because that's the way it is. Mum, Dad, why do I have to eat broccoli? Why do I have to eat lettuce and salad? Because that's the way it is. So you give no explanation. You just say, because I said so, or because that's the way it is.
I can think of another one which is even more informal, actually. It's perhaps even more abrupt or direct. Just because. That one sounds a little bit stroppy. S-T-R-O-P-P-Y. Stroppy is like slightly irritated, you know? So if you're angry or slightly irritated that someone would even question why, you say, just because. Like, I can't be bothered to give you a reason. Just because.
And thank you, Jose, for your kind words about the podcast. We're really pleased that you found and are finding it useful. And if you would like to hear, if anybody would like to hear more expressions that are typically said by parents, go to inglespodcast.com/433 for episode 433, and you'll hear words that our parents used to say.
Craig, we have to go to a different continent now for our next feedback. I believe we have to say something about somebody from Colombia.
Yes, we want to say hello and thank you to Paola from Colombia, who recently was in Valencia, and we were lucky enough to meet her and her friend Viviana for a coffee and a chat, and it was lovely to see you both in person. And Paola bought some coffee from Colombia and some chocolate. Now, we're not going to give you feedback on that at the moment, Paola, because this is the first podcast in our batch of 3. Listen to next week's podcast and you'll hear us drinking your coffee and tasting your wonderful chocolates from Colombia. Thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us.
Hi Reza, hi Craig, hi everyone. This is Paola from Bogota, Colombia. I want to share with your audience something very special that happened to me last week when I had the opportunity to meet you in Valencia. I was in Europe because my husband and I ran the Berlin Marathon, and then we planned to go to Spain to Valencia. When I realized that I would have the opportunity to meet you, I decided to bring you some gifts from my country, especially coffee and chocolate. And thank you for taking the time to share with me a coffee in the old city of Valencia, a beautiful place. And at the beginning, I can say that I was a little bit shy, but then I felt really comfortable because I know you, because I've been listening to you for more than 2 years, and you have learned me a lot of things, and that is something that I appreciate the most, and I know that everybody who listening to you share the same feeling. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to meet you.
So Paula is proof that we really do exist. We're not computer generated.
Speak for yourself.
There is flesh and blood behind this voice, and she's met us. And if you're ever out our way, in other words, in Valencia, and you got a bit of time, give us a shout. We might meet up.
Yeah, we'd be happy to. Next, we have a voice message from Luis from Mexico City.
Hello, Reza and Craig. This is Luis from Mexico City again. And I send you this audio message because I want to ask you an advice. Nowadays, I read some books in English, I watch TV series and movies in English, and even I took some classes on italki. But I feel that I can't pass or reach the next level of English. I mean, I can have a daily conversation, but a work conversation or another kind of conversation, I think I would not able to transmit all my message or my thoughts. So can you help me, please? And remember, if you come to Mexico City, the tacos, beers, and mezcales are on me. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you so much, Luis, for getting in touch again. It's always a pleasure to hear from you and your offer of tacos, beers, and mezcales. We will definitely call on you if and when we hopefully come and visit Mexico City. Notice that Luis said they are on me. That's a very good expression to say that he will treat us or he will pay for us to have some beers and mezcales and tacos. It's on me. I'll pay for it. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks, Luis. I agree with Craig. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. And yeah, I'd love to have a Coronita or maybe even a Pacifico beer. They're two beers I quite like from Mexico one of these days. Your message was really good and really clear. However, I think we can help you with a couple of things. Did you notice anything, Craig?
Just one thing I noticed that was quite a common mistake with the word advice. Advice in English is uncountable. And you said, Luis, I want to ask you an advice. We don't use the article an with advice because it's uncountable. However, it is in Spanish, un consejo. It's better to say, I want to ask for your advice. Or, I want to ask for some advice, because we can use some with uncountable nouns. Or, I want to ask you for a piece of advice. Did you notice anything, Reza?
Yes, there was another thing you said, which I think was, your words were, even I took some classes. And I understand you perfectly, but it's just a question of the word even in the sentence. It has to go between the subject, I, and the verb took. So I even took some classes is the right word order. One other little thing I noticed was pronunciation. I think you said all my message. You didn't quite pronounce the S at the end. That's a very common mistake. With words which end in J and Z and things like that, language, message, baggage, massage. For some reason, the plural causes problems. You perhaps often forget that you have to add another sound to make a plural. So, for example, one message to messages. It's got an extra vowel sound. It's tricky, I guess, if you're a Spanish speaker, because you end with the sound J, and that's strange for you. So you kind of just stop there. But no, you have to add messages is the plural.
And about your question, Luis, it sounds like you're doing a lot of things right. You're reading books in English. You are watching TV series in English. You've even studied with an online teacher, maybe for grammar or vocabulary expansion. But what you need to do is practice, 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 practice. Now, how can you do that? Well, you need to find a group of people to practice with. Now, you can do that for free. You can find a group in your area, perhaps in Mexico City. I'm sure there are groups of people who are meeting to practice English. Go to meetup.com, search for English practice or English exchange Mexico City, and look for groups in your area. Or you can find groups online. There are many Facebook groups. There are many groups in other websites and communities. We've spoken about this many times, but you have to make the effort and be active and find a group that you can practice with. And of course, you could sign up for my conversation course if you're interested in paid group conversation. Again, links to that will be in the show notes at inglespodcast.com. But be proactive. Go out there, Luis, and find people to practice with and just speak. Just practice and speak English as much as possible, together with the things you're already doing. Anything to add to that, Reza?
No, I think you've covered everything, and I'm sure that Luis is going in the right direction, and I'm sure he is progressing, but he might just be slowing down a bit. You might be on a plateau. That sometimes happens. You sometimes reach a plateau. I'd better spell that. Plateau. It's a French word, and it means something high up that's flat. So you've got high up, but it seems that you're not going any higher now. That often happens. There are moments when you just seem to get stuck for a while, but you will start going up again. Maybe you're just on a plateau, but with a little bit of patience, you'll notice that your level pretty soon will start improving.
So keep on, don't give up, get motivated, get out there and find a group of English speakers, Luis. And we want to say hello to another Luis from Mexico. He is originally from Colima in Mexico, but he now lives in Querétaro, which is 2 hours from Mexico City. Luis is an English teacher who wrote us a lovely email saying wonderful things about the podcast and thanking us for the podcast and telling us that now he is actually teaching Spanish in Belfast. That is fantastic. And here is some of what Luis says in his email. When it came time to look at the map, this is Luis choosing where he wants to go to teach Spanish, the moment I saw Northern Ireland there, I thought of Reza and the good comments he's made about his hometown, Belfast. So I thought that would be the perfect place for me. I must say that I was born in a small city in Mexico, Colima, and so I thought Belfast would suit me, as it is not as hectic as London or other major cities around. I also tend to think that people from small places are more welcoming, but I might be biased. No, I don't think you are. I agree with you 100%. If you go to places like London or Paris, they're not particularly friendly, especially to tourists or people that are not from the area. So yeah, always go to a smaller place if you want to have a better experience, in my opinion. And Luis continues, now I'm living in Belfast. I've been here for almost 20 days, and it's a lovely and walkable city. I live in Delhi Street. Is that where the curry restaurants are? Delhi Street.
No, it has that name because a lot of the streets in that area of Belfast are named after places which used to be in former colonies of the United Kingdom.
Oh, like, okay, India, Delhi,
Jerusalem Street as
Bombay,
well. Yeah,
maybe.
all around there.
Okay. So I live in Delhi Street, a few meters away from the Botanic Garden. Sometimes when I walk down the street, I get excited to think that I'm seeing the same scenery as Reza during his childhood and his last vacation. Thank you very much for your email. It really puts petrol in our tank, which means it makes us motivated to podcast more when we get such a lovely, positive email. And he has a question for you, Reza. He asks, Reza, what's the best place to eat or have a coffee here in Belfast?
Ooh, that's a good question, Luis. Well, first, just let me say thanks very much for thinking of me. And I haven't forgotten you. I know you wrote a while ago, but as Craig said, we haven't had a chance to meet. So it's been a while to respond to you. And I was really touched by your email. It really meant a lot to me. And you've mentioned places that I know well. Delhi Street, I know it well. I know the street where you're living well. It's the area of Belfast that I know best, I would say, actually. Let me just clarify, though. I say I'm from Belfast, and I guess if you're from Mexico, you would laugh at this. But technically, I live in a council area just outside Belfast. So even when I'm in Northern Ireland, sometimes I say to people, no, actually, I come from Dunmurry. So it's slightly outside the city. But if that was Mexico, people would laugh because 6-7 miles away from the center, that's nothing. But I'm kind of on the outskirts. Yeah, the outskirts is the Las Afueras of Belfast. But I know the city quite well, and Delhi Street is in an area off Botanic Avenue, which I know very well because I went to school in that area and then I taught in that area for a few years, so I know it very well. The places, well, let's start in that area of the Botanic Gardens. A really nice cafe is a place called Cinnamon. That might be my favorite cafe in your neighborhood. Yeah, so quite near Delhi Street, I would go to Cinnamon at Stranmillis Road. That would be my first choice. I've got other recommendations, but You can read them, Luis, and anybody who's interested in Belfast. You can read them in the show notes. But I mentioned that place, Cinnamon, because I used to go there a lot when I worked in the university. I worked in Queen's University, which is very near where you live. So that's how I know that area. And I used to often go at lunchtime to that cafe, Cinnamon. And I checked, it's still there. It's really nice. But I've mentioned a few other places in the notes to have a coffee. As for restaurants, it seems I'm a little bit obsessed with dogs, doesn't it? Because we all know about Coco, the podcasting dog. There's a really good restaurant in Belfast called Coco. I like it very much. It's no connection with the dog Coco. It just happens to be called Coco. But I highly recommend a place called Coco in the city centre. And one which is in your neighbourhood, Luis, quite near Delhi Street, near the Botanic Gardens, a place called The Barking Dog. You see, I'm obsessed. The Barking Dog on the Malone Road. Two really good places.
But they don't actually serve dog on the menu. It's just the name of the place.
No, hopefully not, no. And they might serve dogs who wish to eat. I'm not sure about that. But both of those places are really good. And as I said earlier, for the cafes, I've also got a few more restaurants in the show notes if you're interested and want to have a look.
And to see these recommendations that Reza has kindly listed, go to inglespodcast.com. You'll see a list of Reza's recommendations of drinking coffee and eating in Belfast. And thanks again, Lewis, for your lovely email. He finishes by saying, if you ever happen to come to Belfast, please let me know. I would be more than happy to meet you. So if you do coincide, you could go and have a coffee in Cinnamon.
I might well get in touch when I'm there, Luis. If I'm back in Belfast in the next few months, I'll be in touch and we can have a coffee together.
Speaking of Belfast, here's a voice message from Valeria from Argentina.
Hi, Reza. Hi, Craig. How is it going? It's Valeria from Argentina again. I just wanted to tell you that I came back recently from a holiday in UK. We went there first to London because of my daughter's birthday. We went to the Warner Bros. Studios of Harry Potter because she's a huge fan of Harry Potter. And then we went to Ibiza and then to Edinburgh, to Stirling, and that was amazing. And then, yes, we went to Belfast, and that's what I wanted to share with you, Reza, because I've been in your city, and it was really amazing. A little bit different from other cities that I know in UK, but it was amazing. I'm a huge fan of the Titanic history, and I always wanted to go. So I'm very, very happy. And on Thursday, we went there in London when I received a message from a friend of mine here in Argentina telling me that the Queen was bad. So we went to Buckingham and we were there when the flag was lowered, and it was really a touching moment. And I'm really proud of being able to be there. So I just wanted to share this with you. Bye-bye.
Well, Valeria, lovely to hear from you. And it sounds like you had a wonderful trip to Europe. I'm so pleased that you visited these places. And it sounds like you had a fantastic time, and your daughter too, with Harry Potter and everything. And yeah, we haven't created an episode about the Queen. We thought about it, and then time passed, and now it seems that it's kind of past the time to mention her. And I'm not a big fan of the Queen, but I was quite touched and a little bit emotional when she did die, which surprised me. But she was a person, whether or not you're keen on the royal family and you're a royalist, she was a person who I admire for the way that she did her duty and the way that she committed herself to her role as Queen over so many years. So yes, I can understand that was an emotional moment. And well, over to you, Reza, to comment on Belfast.
Yes, thanks very much, Valeria, for your message. And I'm so happy that you went to Belfast. I'm also happy you went to the other places in the UK. I think you mentioned Edinburgh. What a beautiful city. I'd love to go back there myself. And Belfast, yeah, is in some ways a bit different to other cities in the UK. Obviously, it's on a different island. It's in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. And also, it just has a certain feel to it, which makes it feel a little bit different. I suppose you could be forgiven for thinking you're not even in the UK. And let's not get into politics. Some people would prefer that it weren't in the UK. So I guess that has something to do with it. So it's interesting. You get to see the UK and you get to see Ireland at the same time by going to Belfast. And I'm really glad that you went and found out about the Titanic history, because there's been a lot of negative things over the years associated with Belfast because we've had our problems. But the Titanic story, it didn't end perfectly, that's true, but still it's...
That's a bit of an understatement. It
yeah.
didn't quite end perfectly.
But not enough time has passed for us to look back at the good side of it, that it was an amazing ship and it just
didn't float.
It didn't quite float. It didn't... But, the fact that we could produce such an amazing feat of engineering. The word feat there, by the way, is F-E-A-T, not F-E-E-T. Feat is like an amazing achievement, and people in Belfast are very proud of that. I'm personally very proud of it because my grandfather worked in the shipyard where they built the Titanic.
Oh, really?
So,
I didn't know that.
So that means a lot to people from Belfast, that people appreciate that. And Craig's not going to like this joke. You can even buy T-shirts in Belfast with this joke written on it. There's a picture of the Titanic and it says, well, it was all right when it left here and the captain was English. You can buy T-shirts with that, but that might stir up a bit of trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously that's just a joke. It was very, very unfortunate that Titanic... It would have happened to any ship, by the way. That iceberg would have destroyed any ship. That's been proven beyond all doubt. It wasn't that we didn't build it very well. And hey, it's so nice to know that Argentinians are getting all the way to Belfast, because it's a long way away. And to think I've grown up all my life wanting to visit Patagonia, and you've gone all the way to Belfast. I'll have to get to Argentina one of these days. Maybe I'll see you there, Valeria.
And thank you very much for sharing your trip with us and letting us know what you did over there.
Can I just say one little thing about something I think we could correct? Yeah, it's important. Valeria, sorry to be killjoy, the person who kills the joy, but you said the Queen was bad. So the Queen was bad? No. The Queen felt bad? Yes. Or the Queen was ill? But you can't say the Queen was bad when you refer to her health. Yeah, the Queen felt bad, and then later she sadly died. Or the Queen was ill, but you can't say she was bad. Just that little vocabulary point.
Next, we have a question that's come in from Facundo, our friend Facundo, and he wrote an email with a question about grammar. He begins with some lovely kind words and says, I want to know that you are my heroes. Thank you very much. I have a superpower and I want to say thank you a lot. I really appreciate your work very much. Thank you, Facundo. Now, he's writing to us with a little doubt about grammar we explained in episode 434 of the podcast, inglespodcast.com/434, in which we spoke about the grammar of had better. And Reza, would you like to read about Facundo's doubts that he expressed in his email?
Yes, because it's a really good question. It really got us thinking and talking a lot about it. It's a very, very good question. Facundo wrote, you've written, hadn't you better follow this podcast on your app? Had you better not follow this podcast on your app? You don't want to miss any episodes.
That's true.
So here's my doubt, he's writing. In the phrase, had you better not follow this podcast on your app? He thinks no corremos el riesgo que esto se entienda como lo contrario. I'm reading Facundo's words in Spanish. We do not run the risk of changing the meaning in the opposite direction. En español, yo estoy entendiendo algo así. ¿Será mejor que no sigas este podcast en tu app? No, Facundo, that's not right. That's not right. But I'll continue reading what he's written. Siguiendo la línea de los otros ejemplos, me hubiese resultado más fácil de entender como los otros ejemplos de preguntas en negativo. Following the idea of the other examples, I would have written something like, had you not better follow this podcast on your app? That's the bit that really got me thinking, Facundo. It's a variation of what I said in the podcast. I used the order, had you better not. But you can also say, had you not better. But it means the same. There's no difference. Had you better not follow this podcast on your app, or had you not better follow this podcast on your app? They're a different word order, but they mean the same thing. But they don't mean what you think. ¿Será mejor que no sigas este podcast? No. It means será mejor que sigas este podcast. It means the opposite. In other words, it's a good idea that you follow this podcast. We're not telling you not to follow it. We're telling you to follow it, but we use a negative. So in Spanish, it would be no será mejor que sigas este podcast en tu app. And it doesn't matter if you use the long version, had you better not follow, or the other one, had you not better follow, or the contraction, hadn't you better follow. They all mean the same thing. They're all in the negative, but they're a negative question, which is really making a suggestion, which is, we think you should follow this podcast. We think it's a good idea, but we do it with a negative. Hadn't you better follow this? Or had you better not follow? Or had you not better follow? They all mean the same thing, which is we're suggesting that you do it. It's complicated, I know.
It is, and we apologize to listeners who don't speak Spanish, but most of our listeners do speak Spanish, so I think the problem here is one of translation, maybe direct translation. So yeah, it's tricky, but I think if you go and listen to that podcast, episode 434, then our explanation will be clear. Next, we have a voice message from Alexander from Ukraine, who is currently living in the Segovia province near Madrid.
Hello, Reza and Craig. This is Alexander, who lives in a small village of Segovia province on the border with Madrid's community. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the wonderful work you've been doing, which is not only instructive but also fun and entertaining. In one of your latest podcasts, you asked for comments about eating etiquette, so I originally come from Ukraine, and in my country the rules of behavior at the table are very similar to the ones in the UK. For example, a communal dish with mashed potatoes or stewed meat, etc., always has a spoon to serve. Dishes with sliced cheese or sausages might have some tongs or a fork, but it might not, because you can take that kind of food with your fork without contaminating the rest. Washing hands is essential, and burping considered as a bad manner. I'd also like to say about the tradition of eating cheese at the end of a meal in the UK. It's a very good one, for it helps to conserve your teeth. Cheese is a good remedy to recover acid-base balance in your mouth, particularly after eating something sweet or sour. Well, that's it for this time. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Alexander. It's a pleasure to get your message. And Alexander's referring and speaking about a podcast on table manners, which was episode 429. So if you want to hear all of that, go to inglespodcast.com/429. And we spoke about table manners, especially focused around the UK, because people say that British people have excellent table manners, but very bad food, which I think might be true. And we also spoke about the hygiene of taking things from the middle of the table. It's very common in Spain with tapas, and using a fork, and with COVID and everything, is that a good idea? So that's what Alexander was referring to. Any comments, Reza?
Yes, Alexander, thanks very much for your message. And it was interesting to see that Ukrainian customs are quite similar to the United Kingdom.
Yeah, they are, yeah.
Yeah. So you're very strict or generally strict about having a serving spoon. You mentioned the serving spoon. So you do have communal things in the middle, but you shouldn't stick your own fork in there. Same as the UK. Yeah. You use a serving spoon or a serving fork for everyone. And also, like the UK, you said that burping is bad manners. Well, it's the same in Spain, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like that word burping, B-U-R-P, to burp. And there's another word you could use. You could also say belch. It's the same. Sorry. Right on cue.
That was a burp, if you did not know that word.
A burp, B-U-R-P, or a belch, B-E-L-C-H, same thing. So burping or belching is bad manners in Ukraine, the UK, and Spain, and probably most countries in the world.
Very bad manners. Although Alexander said a bad manner, which I'm wondering, would you use it in the singular? You don't tend to hear that, do you? It's a bad manner. I would say it's bad manners, using the plural.
That's true, isn't it? Although the word manner does exist as a singular, but we nearly always use it plurally, don't we? Yeah.
Yep. And your comment about cheese helping regain the acid balance in your mouth after eating something sweet. I never really thought about that, but it's true. Cheese tends to be eaten, at least in the UK, at the end of the meal. And I always wondered why. Why not finish a meal with something sweet like ice cream or cake or chocolate, something sweet? But of course, in Spain, it's very common to find cheese and quince, Q-U-I-N-C-E, which, if you're a Spanish speaker, is membrillo. And that often goes together. Now, that might be a balancing thing, which I never thought about before.
Yes, the only difference is Spanish people are more likely to eat the cheese with or without the quince at the start of the meal. They tend to have it at the start. It would be unusual for them to have the cheese right at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alexander, for your message. And now it's your turn to practice your English. Please keep your comments, your voice messages, and your emails coming. We love to hear from you. You can send us a voice message easily by going to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. Emails, Reza?
If you want to write, fine. We prefer voice messages because we like to play them for other people. But if you're a bit shy, a bit timid, you could email. So Craig@inglespodcast.com is one address, or me, belfastreza@gmail.com, if you want to write.
And I'd like to remind you that if you are interested in a paid course to help you with your English, on the Mansion Ingles website, you can find some paid courses. Go to store.mencioningles.net.
Thanks to all those kind listeners who help us by supporting the podcast through the Patreon scheme. That's Patreon, Patreon. If you're interested, you could join the program if you like for as little as $1.20 per month. The 20 cents is to pay the VAT tax. And as a thank you to people who do that, you get instant access to recent audio transcriptions. So if you're thinking of donating, have a look at the link, click on it. It's www.patreon.com/Ingles podcast.
And before we go out the door today, we'd like to say a huge thank you to all of you. And unfortunately, we don't have time to mention all of your names, but we will say thank you to people who have joined us recently. And they are Rosa Alion, Gerard, Javier Correa Zambade, Silvia, and Rodrigo Delgado. Now, Rodrigo had some problems with Patreon. Sometimes this happens if you change your credit card. It doesn't always let you back on. I'm trying to clarify why this is happening. A solution would probably be to use a separate, different email address with your new credit card. So if you're having problems, just try a different email address. I think that works, and I will let you know if I get a reply from Patreon anytime soon. What's next week, Reza?
Well, for next week, you better get your seatbelt on because we'll be doing road trips.
Yep, we're on the road next week. Not literally, but virtually. So join us for that next week. Thank you for listening this week. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. And until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.